Hi, and welcome to another in the series of the GOOS webinars. Today we have Dr. Juliet Hermes of the South African Environmental Observation Network, SEON, here to talk to us about ocean best practices. And Juliet is also the Vice Chair for the JCOM Observation Coordination Group on standards and best practices, and she's here to talk about a little bit about the ocean best practices work within the observations coordination group, but then also importantly about another team, the ocean best practices working group that we've been working with on a GOOS supported project to develop a global system for the archive and access of ocean best practices. So I think it's going to be a really interesting talk. And we have to say thank you very much to Juliet from joining from South Africa to give this talk. My name is Emma Heslop. I work in the GOOS office here in Paris, and I will moderate the questions after the talk. And you can add questions in to Juliet on the talk as we go through the talk. There's a sidebar on the webinar interface that allows you to add questions. The presentation will take about 30 minutes, and so I'm going to now hand over to Juliet to take us through the ocean observing standards and best practices. So over to you, Juliet. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Emma, and thanks to all of you that have joined this webinar. I still find it very difficult that I can't see people's faces, but you can see mine. So I'm just going to try and talk to my computer screen. So today I'm going to be talking about ocean observing standards and best practices and what we've been doing. You can see there that this is a presentation by myself and Emma, and also there's a number of other people who are listed. So although I'm actually physically speaking and giving the presentation, the work is a collation of work from all of the people listed there, some of whom are available at the end as panelists to help in answering any specific questions. So as Emma mentioned, I started off doing this through the JCOM OCG, and for those of you that aren't overly familiar with that, I just thought I'd put in a couple of slides. So JCOM is the Joint Commission of Oceanography and Marine Meteorology, and it's the Observation Coordination Group. And the mission that they have is to develop, coordinate and maintain ocean observing networks, and to monitor the efficiency of the overall observing system. And also that the OCG has lead responsibility for a number of important and well-established observational programs. And those are I've listed those along the top here. So you can see the Data Buoy Cooperation Panel, which includes global drifters, RAMA and sort of regional buoy networks. You've got the Ships Observation Team, the Global Sea Level Observing System, Argo, Ocean Sites and GoShip. And there's also a number of emerging networks, which include ocean gliders and HF radar. And there's some really nice reporting from the observing systems you can see the link here, jcomops.org report card for 2018. So if you have a look at that, you can see some of the stats and figures behind what the observing systems are currently doing. So within JCOM OCG, there's been a focus towards standards and best practices. And with the observation networks, we've been looking at what the vision really is and what we want to try and achieve. So the idea is to really identify, coordinate and promote the development of standards and documented best practices across all areas of ocean observing and marine meteorology, the platforms of JCOM and the partner network and networks and activities. And then following this, to really to work towards this, we've been cataloging and reviewing all the best practices. We've been looking at where there are gaps and areas where really taking a holistic approach across the platforms and variables can be taken, with the idea to really providing best practices by, for example, by essential ocean variables. And as part of this, we've kind of done a review, publication and evaluation process, and also we're encouraging the use of the ocean best practice system, which is what I'm going to focus a lot more on today. So the reason behind this, the challenges of best practices, I mean, I think I'm preaching to the converted here, but you know, they vary so widely across the ocean research and operations community with different formats containing different information, and it's really hard to compare best practices for one particular variable, or to really see that the same practices are being used. And we're investing so much money at the moment in ocean observing systems, we don't want to be looking back in 5 to 10 years' time and looking at what will then be historical observations and not being clear about how those observations were made and whether they're interoperable. So what we really need to start doing now is considering the best practices we're using and sharing them, and where possible, you know, really making sure we're all using the same kind of best practices. So through the work that I was doing with JCOM, I became linked up at the beginning of 2017 with an international group of people who were also all working on ocean best practices. So those were the people I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. So they're coming from all different institutes all over the world, and the work was being supported through the EC 2020 Atlantos, IEEE, the NSF Research Coordination Network, as well as the support that's coming from GOOS and JCOM through the work that Emma and myself are doing. So we formed from this an Ocean Best Practices core working group where we were all working towards the same aims. And the vision of this is really, it's similar to the JCOM vision, but it's a lot broader, to increase efficiency, reproducibility and interoperability of the entire observing value chain, and really providing the observing community with a unified, sustained and readily accessible knowledge base. And the mission to do this is to eventually provide coordinated and sustained global access to best practices. And in doing this, developing a system and engaging all the communities to produce these best practice documents and to make them openly available. So this is the Ocean Best Practice system that we've got, and this is what I'm going to be going through today. And it's really, you can see down in the bottom right hand corner there, they're the key members of the working group. So it's really centered on 4 key components, which I'll talk through. The best practice repository, which is hosted by UNESCO IOC IODE, with the aim of providing a sustained open access and internationally recognized repository. Then there's advanced indexing, which is really going to be integrated into a system that provides increased discoverability and access to best practice documents through simple interfaces, metrics, and advanced ocean knowledge-based semantic indexing and searching. And that's really kind of a very novel, different approach that's being taken within the Ocean Best Practices system, which I'll highlight later. There's a peer-reviewed best practice journal topic in Frontiers in Marine Science. And then there's the community of ocean best practice developers and users that are really the key components of, and which include, but not exclusively, obviously, but we've been working closely with the OCG networks, the GRAs, and the GOOS panels. So I'm going to start off by talking about the repository. Currently, if you go to oceanbestpractices.net, that's where you're going to be able to upload your documents. And if you have done that already, then if your best practices are already in there, then they're already adhering to these FAIR principles, which I mentioned. So that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So by findable, the IOD can now issue DOIs for your best practices, and there's a basic search function. Accessible, because the best practices in the repository are persistent. So even if the project is over, the best practices are safe and well indexed. They're reusable because they're discoverable, and hence they can be reused. And the interoperability is kind of where it's slightly harder, and that's where the technology comes in, which I'll discuss when I've finished talking about the repository. So as part of the vision for best practice creators is to upload their best practice files to the repository, and then the system will automatically ingest and semantically index the content. To assist with this process, we really need detailed metadata to provide a complete description. It's not, you can upload your best practices without the metadata, but that's really going to hinder the searchability and the future use of the best practices. So it's kind of similar to providing metadata for your data sets. So there is an example on the screen now of the kind of metadata that we would require when uploading the best practices. The other thing that we offer through the best practices repository is a template. So this, again, is in no way prescriptive. If you have your own best practices or you're busy writing best practices, then that's not going to impact them being uploaded. The templates have really been put in place for people who haven't written a best practice or don't know where to begin. So at the moment, we have best templates available for sensors, applications, and data management. And there will be more to follow, but it would be great if people have specific templates that they think would be useful or some ideas around this, then if they could just email or kind of send through the template. So this is just an example here of one of the documents that was created using one of the templates that we provide. So the interface is currently in a testing phase, and shown on the screen now is the beta phase of the new user interface repository. You can see there it's oceanbestpractices.org. It's going to be available by October, and hopefully, and we are looking for people who might be keen to kind of review the whole process and do some trials with the searching. Soon we're going to be introducing things such as searching via different EOVs or putting various filters on, and I'll go through how the searching works. And we're also working towards specific branding of best practices. So, for example, best practices which have been endorsed by one of the GOOS panels, we will in the next few months have that as a front page to a best practice, so that you could maybe filter your best practices by those which have been GOOS endorsed. And so currently we're at around 300 documents, which is an incredible growth, and we're hoping to reach a target of 500 in the next few months. So thanks any of you that are listening who have been uploading your best practices, thanks for that. So back now to the FAIR principles and back to being interoperable. So the focus being on interoperable, the metadata should somehow be formalized and in a language for knowledge representation, such as artificial intelligence. And that's what I'm going to move on to now, is the advanced technology that's really being used on this and being run through Pierluigi. And so I'm going to just talk about that briefly. So there's a sort of full access to the ontology approach in the IODE repository. And moving into the semantics and the search capabilities, which is a very novel part of what we're doing. The advanced technology is based on the repository itself. So for example, if you submitted a best practice with information about methane seeping up from the seafloor, then you'll be using a certain terminology, such as the environment that you worked in or the sensors you used. So if you look at the seafloor tab here, you can see that the system's detecting words inside your best practices and linking them to a representation of the knowledge which is already held inside that word. And to do this, we're using ontologies, which are knowledge representations that are machine readable. And once we have the machines indexing the best practices, then they know what they're about. So if it kind of makes the terms within your best practices more discoverable. For example, if you were searching for the term pockmark field, the system would still bring back this best practice, even if you didn't use that particular term. It would have the knowledge generated that the pockmark field was related to the best practice with seafloor. So basically, we're using this technology to get the knowledge out of people's heads and then onto the system, so that the web of knowledge which is being used within these best practices is growing. And you can really help to make this grow faster by completing detailed metadata, but it's not essential. So the linkage of knowledge is not just for the best practices, but it kind of floats on top of your best practices. So eventually you'll be able to link data sets through this kind of searching to the best practices, to the words that are being used in your best practices. So it's really making an integrated kind of future-proofing your best practices so that they can be integrated into distributed systems. So just kind of some more examples as we move along the process and refine it, when we're going to have a best practice 2, which is linked to the knowledge representation technologies. So we could eventually ask the system to kind of, for example, get the chemical names that are used in certain kind of best practices, and the system will automatically know what you're talking about. So it will know, for example, what's around, say if you put in nitrous oxide, it will know the example around that. And the same thing holds true for, say, sensors or for the software. So you'll be able to ask the system something quite specific, and it will go through the growing compendium of best practices and find you specific chunks of information. So how it all works is we start somewhere with the best practice developers. They submit their best practices in the system, and at the same time we're pulling in the ontologies and the vocabularies and different representations of knowledge, and we're merging them all together into an ocean sciences knowledge base. We then extract text from the best practices, combine it with the ontologies and vocabularies to say every best practice has the following chunks of knowledge in it. And we can expose this to the semantic search interface, which is guided by the terms as well as the knowledge. And the searches are then eventually linked back to the repository and also to the journal that I'll talk about. And then all of this goes back into the system and forms this kind of complete loop. So as an example, this is the beta interface, which I put up earlier. So you can have two, they currently have 2 ontologies, one for environment and one for chemicals, and that's going to increase. And say you put in the search term for sea ice, you can see there it's been added in. And then once that search is run, it'll find the best practices that are tagged with the sea ice, which you can see here. And on the left, it's not just sea ice that you're seeing, but it's bringing up other knowledge systems that have to do with ice. And then importantly, if you click on any of those tags, you can see the knowledge neighborhood around it. So those tags weren't necessarily in the document, but the system knows that they're related to the best practice. So in conclusion, the technologies that are powering the Ocean Best Practices system can preserve, expose, and help you to manage your best practices while linking them to pooled knowledge and soon, hopefully, to data holdings. And the knowledge which is in your submitted best practices will really shape those technologies, bringing your research and observation themes into the linked datascape. And then it's truly interoperable, so the Ocean Best Practice system supports within network and inter-network use of best practices. So I'm going to move on now to talk about the peer review journal. This is really being run through Hermes, and it is sitting between the community and the best practice repository. And the idea behind it was that the best practices are created by experts, but it's good to be able to open these up to a larger group through a peer review process. And because best practices are often more than standard operating procedures or manuals, then we felt that there was a great opportunity to be able to publish them and kind of give a reward system to the people that are writing these best practices up. And we felt that the Frontiers research topic gave all facets of best practices a home. And we chose Frontiers because it's linked to the repository and it's open access, and it doesn't have some of the limitations that other journals have. And it also has a very open review process. So Frontiers works with a research topic, and in our case, it's ocean observing. And so we fall under the ocean observing section, and our research topic is best practices in ocean observing. And you can see here the link to get into that. It's a fully open access journal and it's linked to the repository. So the idea being is that you write up a kind of journal style paper on best practices, and then you link that to the best practices which have actually been submitted into the journal. So the submission process, you go in via the research topic page and you select an article type and a guest editor, and then you register with Loop and you submit your article. The review happens and it's kind of for those that haven't published through Frontiers, it goes first to an independent review and it becomes interactive. So the authors and the reviewers actually have a dialogue with each other, and there can be several iterations of this. The review is then finalized and either endorsed or rejected, and then it's published online. So at the moment, we have 40 authors who have accepted invitation, and there are 5 submissions, with 1 published and 4 coming towards the end of their interactive review. And the published one is one by Frank Muller-Karger et al. And you can see that already it's had over 2,000 views since it was published very recently. So the last thing I'm really going to talk about today is the kind of the overarching community and how we're interacting with the community, who are really an integral part of the best practices. Without community support, obviously the best practices are obsolete. So we need people not only to create the best practices, but also to take up and use them. And we're really encouraging and supporting the documenting, dissemination, reviewing, publishing, training, and support of using best practices for ocean observing. So what we're really asking the community is to submit their best practices to the repository, and also to use those best practices and be an advocate of the repository. Possibly, if you can, to be involved in the beta testing of the repository. We're also encouraging people to submit to Frontiers, and also if they're willing to sign up as a reviewer for any of the articles. We would love to engage and feedback with anyone who's particularly interested in best practices. So anyone can email me, or I'll put an email up at the end of the presentation if you want more information. We're also looking at raising areas, opportunities of development, outreach, and capacity development. And one of the links that we've been discussing is that of the IOD Ocean Teacher, which is really a great place to be promoting and training people in the use of best practices. We also have a newsletter, and so anyone who has anything interesting, to submit that to us and it will come out in the newsletter, and also to subscribe to the newsletter. And then, so what do we really feel that the key things are that the community gets out of what we're doing as a working group? Well, the first thing obviously is access to extensive, trusted and broadly adopted documentation of best practices with semantic and smart searching. A sustained repository to host best practices, which can issue DOIs and templates. Peer-reviewed publications, acknowledgements, recognition, guidance, branding and confidence, searchability, and also there's the option to receive feedback on your best practices. So if you're maybe working in a bit of a silo and you can upload your best practices, then people can communicate with you on how they've used them, or maybe how they've modified them, or different comments on that. And it's really a community service, and it's a way to keep updated, it's a way to get acknowledgement, and a way to feedback into the process. So what have we done so far, or what are our key achievements? We began work in early 2017 with the oceanbestpractices.org, and after a few months we felt the time was right to hold a kind of community workshop, which we did in Paris in November. And we had a large number of participants from many different organizations around the world, and I'll talk about that in the next slide a bit more. So the DOIs can now be issued through IODE for best practices. We've taken part in GOOS Regional Alliance meeting, and we're really working quite closely with GOOS and the panels and the regional alliances. There's been an Ocean Sciences Town Hall and various posters at different meetings, and we're leading a community white paper for Ocean OBS. The Frontiers Journal is up and running, and also a SCORE working group was submitted. We don't know yet the outcomes of that. There's the newsletter, and you can see there where you can email if you want to sign up for the newsletter. And there was also a webinar that was done a couple of months ago. So this is the workshop that we had in Paris, and it's been published as an EOS article if anyone wants to read more about what we did. And aside from really developing the strategy and getting input, we also sort of worked hard at coming up with really a definition of what we were talking about when we talked about best practices. So that is that a community best practice is a methodology that has repeatedly produced superior results relative to other methodologies with the same objective. And to be fully elevated to a best practice, a promising method needs to be adopted and employed by multiple organizations. And the proceedings of this are also available online if anyone wants to read more. So moving forward, what are our next steps? The monthly newsletters are being produced. The new portal with enhanced searchability will be available at the end of October, hopefully. Presentations are going to be given at a number of upcoming meetings. And we're also holding a smaller best practice workshop again in Paris. And we're beginning work on focusing a lot more on essential ocean variable best practices and to really kind of complete an analysis of what is missing and how we can move forward with having a totally holistic approach to best practices across EOVs. Additionally, we want to coordinate with new technologies as they develop and offer recommendations and links with other programs. Identify selection criteria for best practice documents or standards. So one of the things that I spoke about as well, just to highlight again, that we're really working with GOOS anyway for highlighting which best practices are already supported by the community through the different GOOS panels. And also investigate areas for intercomparison across the OCG networks, and if there are specific procedures that can be acknowledged and widely used, and is this feasible? So really just to finish up, the last slide with highlights with benefits of the Ocean Best Practice System. It's a living, sustained, comprehensive system for ocean observing practices. You get academic recognition through peer review and DOIs, improved visibility from search engines, training resources. And one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do, I think we can at the moment already, is, for example, put up videos of best practices. So oftentimes it's easier to see things in a video when it's doing observing. So that will be something that the repository will be able to support, and really greater interoperability across the programs and the institutions. So this is the best practice working group that I've mentioned, and the different institutes that are involved and the partners that we're working with to do this. And I don't know if that's half an hour, but that's the end of the presentation. So thank you all for listening, and I think then we will look at the questions, or Emma will help to moderate the questions.
I will indeed. Thank you very much, Juliet. That was a fantastic presentation, and really, really good to see all the work. And I have to encourage people to find the question chat box and put the questions in there. We have a couple coming up, and first of all, I think I'd quite like to ask a question. Perhaps sort of looking out to the future, and where would you see the ocean best practices system sort of, we've been working on it now for sort of a year and a half, let's say. Where will we be in another year and a half's time, do you think? What would that kind of look like to you?
I think that the beta phase will be up and running. I think a year and a half it's taken to get the momentum going and to really start getting to grips with. It's actually quite a beast that we're dealing with. So it's taken a year and a half to get to there, and now we're doing the testing phase. And I would hopefully imagine in another year and a half that the repository will really be the go-to place for anyone. It'll be well known as a really good quality repository for best practices. We'll be able to start looking at essential ocean variables and best practices that can be used across the board. And that will really help to integrate different sensors that are taking the same measurements. And I think that's something that we really want to work towards. So yeah, in a year and a half, I see the repository hosting a lot more best practices than it currently is, and the journal also having a good number of publications coming out.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to go on to some questions from the floor, and also just to say that we are being recorded, and so if you wanted to go back and share the presentation that Juliet's given with any of your colleagues, then you'll be notified of the link and where to find it, and it's on the GOOS website. So first question I have is from Chris Waldman. and he's asking, how do you deal with, a very good question, how do you deal with a revision of best practice documents? And I guess this is the database area, yeah?
Yeah, so we have spoken in the past about a revision, as in an updating of best practices.
Yes.
Sorry, I was thinking of a review. So I think it's really very important that within the repository, it's clearly labeled that it is an update of a best practice. But we need to ensure that we also archive the old best practices, because the information that's held in them is still going to be very relevant for the data that was collecting using those best practices. So the repository will archive them, and the new revision will be updated. And what we have talked about is that with the best practices that are loaded on the repository, and we will eventually start working towards maybe pinging or an automatic response for the owner of that best practice, so that after a certain time period, we can automatically follow up with them to say, maybe after 5 years, is this still your current best practice? Is there a revision? So that was something we were looking at automating.
Right, so there should be a series of automation procedures embedded in the repository, the IoT-based repository, around that. Okay, so we have another one from Shelby Brunner of NOAA, and saying, how do we sign up for the newsletter stroke updates? The updates are mainly coming through the newsletters, aren't they, which tell us when there are seminars and things going on, so signing up for the newsletter should be sufficient.
Yeah, so I've just pulled that slide back up again with the address to register.
Right, so that's Ocean Best Practice Community, OBP Community at oceanbestpractices.org. Right, we have another one from Leonor Barona, asking if there's any linkage with TDWG, bioinformation standards. And I guess would this be an ontology question, because we have Pierre Luigi kind of online in the ontology area. Let me see. Yep.
Let's hand that over to Pierre Luigi.
Yeah, but I know that also, I mean, I just sort of talk in the meantime that I think that, we are also open to understanding the ontologies that we would need to connect to. In that, we have a series of ontologies that we can access, currently picked up by Pierre Luigi, and but also at the same time other ontologies that are out there that will be useful for the system to link to. I mean, this is information that's important and relevant, and we're happy to link to other ontologies. Let me see if I can.
Actually, I'm online now.
Right. Okay. So Pierre Luigi, let me introduce you. You are our sort of technology expert. So do you have anything more to add on to that?
Yep, sure. So some of the ontologies that are used for the tagging in the system are coming from the OBO Foundry and Library, and many of those are overlapping with some of the Darwin Core standards space. So Darwin Core Habitat, for example, can map to ENVO fields if the submitters wanted to. And there are continuing discussions in TADWIG about how to bring those two worlds from the OBO Library and Foundry closer to the Darwin Core set. So yes, the technology will be tied there, and there are ongoing efforts to bring those two communities closer together. This is true of the mixed standards for genomics and several others. We're trying to consolidate as much as we can. Some of the other metadata fields, as they stand now, are indeed mappable to other Darwin Core terms. We haven't looked at that yet, but if there's interest from TADWIG or TADWIG Working Group to approach that, we're happy to do so. Some of that data is more or less good to go.
Great. So if the TADWIG community was interested in doing that, who should they contact, Pierre?
They can go through me. I'm familiar with that space too.
Right. Okay, great. So I think that probably answers that question. We have another good question come up from Martin Kramp, who works with JCOMOPS. and also with the Ghost Ship team. And he's asking about ownership for the documents, presumably best practices that are placed within the repository, and does that ownership remain with the authors, and sort of how does that function?
Yeah, so Pauline can also add to this, but it's a question obviously that people are always very concerned about, and the ownership remains with the owner of the best practices document. And obviously the best practice document, if it's already hosted on a website by, say, Ghost Ship, and like the hydro manuals on there or whatever, then that will stay there, and there is a possibility to just put a link, but that's not ideal because the links can be broken. So we would ask that the best practice also gets uploaded onto the repository, but the ownership and everything remains with Ghost Ship. So I don't know if Pauline, I know we've had many discussions around this, and Pauline, whether you want to elaborate any more.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Juliet, that the copyright remains with the author and the document creator. All I would ask is, and in fact, you will find that document possibly in many other repositories, not just OBP, but we would like to think that OBP was the repository to go to for best practices. One thing I would sort of advocate and really push for is that when you create a best practice document, although the copyright always remains with you, that you actually allocate, and if you have heard about Creative Commons, it's indicating how the user can use that document and the information in it, and how much you will allow that user to use the document. So I would press for any BP creator, as well as obviously retaining the copyright, that they would allocate a Creative Commons license to their document so that we all know exactly how it can be used.
And that Creative Commons license, Pauline, is that something that we interrogate when the best practices are deposited so that they are displayed in the right way, or that's something that's attached to the document or travels with the document?
There is a license metadata field process where you license a Creative Commons or something else is allocated to the document, but it really is advisable for the Creative Commons or the use permissions on the document itself as well.
Right. I'm not sure I caught all of that. It seems to be a bit of a bad connection, but maybe we can come back later to that. I have another question from Chris Waldman, who is asking if we can give more details on how we're planning to guide the process of the development of best practices for emerging observing methods.
So that's something that, yeah, we've been thinking about. So obviously providing a template is one way that we can support that. But I think the key also is to really learn a lot from very well established observing methods, and to be able to help facilitate the kind of the discussions and the interaction. So that's something also that I've been looking at through JCOM in terms of emerging networks and sensors, and really looking at where there's overlap with very well established groups, and looking at their best practices and how the new observing method can learn from that. I don't know if that,
Yeah, so in a sense, trying to offer the capability to leverage the existing by using the repository, so that if there's things that can be adapted, etc., that you have a resource there, but also at the same time helping provide some kind of helping with a template for people who want to know what, have an idea of the sections to cover. Also, I would say that the journal and the peer review is also another avenue that can help in terms of providing feedback, should you be interested in publishing this as a best practice through that route. I have another question coming in, saying from Katie Hill, saying that with 300 documents and growing, how can a user know which best practices searched are most widely accepted or most appropriate?
So That in part is what we're working towards now. Remember, this is still very new and we're in the beta testing phase. So that is a question that, well, one of the things, as I mentioned, that we're going to be doing is working with GOOS and the panels to get specific endorsement. So it might be that you feel very strongly that you want to find a best practice which has been endorsed by GOOS and the GOOS community, in which case there will be a filter that you can select where you only look at best practices which have been endorsed by GOOS, for example. The other thing is that we are asking people, I think Pauline might need to talk to this again. There was a thought that we kind of ask, it's difficult to say how many people are using a best practice or what is most widely used. It's difficult to measure. So I think what we're focusing on is making sure that the best practices we have are endorsed by the community. And this goes again to the fact that you can feed back on the best practice, and also going to the journal and getting the best practice published in that way. That is another way that we know that the best practice is really widely accepted by the community.
Absolutely, and I think within the database also that we're tracking downloads, and also there is some sense, there is a sort of a database search with the DOI to see if this DOI is referenced, I believe, and there is also an ability to see which pages obviously are accessed, so who's accessing various best practices. And I think, I mean, it also within the definition of uploading a best practice, this is a best practice that has been tested, and we're also looking for ones that, you know, are in use by more than one person, so to speak. So, you know, that they've proved across different applications to provide superior results. We have another question actually from Jay, who's asking how can the best practice system help multidisciplinary collaborations?
I think so. That's one of the things whereby this smart searching, the semantic technology is really going to be helpful, because if you're typing in a search looking at one thing, it's going to bring in all the different knowledge information around that. So that will help expand it to maybe if someone's using a best practice on one thing that you wouldn't necessarily always consider if you were working in a different discipline. It will also help allow people who aren't, you know, obviously then there's the development and the training whereby you're getting people who maybe aren't used to working in, say, the physical fields, and they'll have access to best practices which can enable them to ensure that the data that they're taking, perhaps with their CTD fixed onto a camera, they can ensure through the best practices that that data is really going to be well collected.
Okay, and actually one of our colleagues also reminded me that back to the last question, that, you know, there are some analytics that should be available through the best practices repository, in terms of seeing perhaps also what countries that people are downloading various best practices for, because some best practices might be more regionally focused than others, depending on conditions and things like that. I have kind of a question. With our 300 documents, I don't know if you have a sense yet of how many of the GOOS EOVs are actually covered within the database to date. And that might be something that is, because I'm not sure that they are all covered yet, and but we must be getting there.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting to sit down and do a search and see.
Perhaps we should have it as part of our testing phase.
Yeah, that would be a good test.
And on the capacity development side of things, we've mentioned that, and we also mentioned perhaps, you know, there is some development and ideas, not least because IOD is hosting the repository, that these best practices could also support the Ocean Teacher work. I think we also have discussed, and perhaps you can comment further, that having a best practices portal really could provide support to to people who are looking to teach or to access best practices for use within teaching within ocean observing for capacity development, and that one of the requests in terms of being able to upload videos and things like that, which give a practical demonstration of how the best practice is implemented, especially useful perhaps more in some areas than others, but certainly really useful. So I don't know if there's any more that you'd be interested to sort of add around that area.
Yeah, so one of the other things that we will do as well is to put the repository onto DVD or onto thumb drives. Obviously, it can't be up to, so we would do like a version 1, and that just will enable people who don't have great internet access or who maybe are going to be at sea for a long time or whatever to be able to access the repository off a thumb drive. And again, as you mentioned, you know, looking at different regions or looking at different capabilities, I think that's where working with the GOOS regional alliances will also be great. And the fact that you can get this feedback on your best practices as well. So maybe if there's a summer school going on and then all of the students in the summer school are tasked with using the repository and looking at best practices, and they're the ones that are actually going to be doing the observing. So maybe they're going to find that really this one little bit that's written in the best practice just isn't working for them or for their region or for whatever they're doing. They'll be able to feed back to the owner of the best practice. And I think that would be useful.
Okay. And just to reflect some additional questions that are coming in. One, again, that I think we've been asked a couple of times. When we say an ocean best practice, does that mean a standard operating procedure? Are manuals included? What kind of comes under that?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, you know, in terms of best practice, it can be a number of things: SOPs, manuals, different standards. And so, yeah, it's totally encompassing everything. And in a way, the journal's in place to try and help publish the many different facets of which a best practice can be written. But there's no specific document style or whatever that is a best practice, other than it's a best practice.
And produces superior results, which is back to the definition, I guess. And we've also talked, I think, within that best practices, they might encompass different parts of, let's say, the workflow of you know, people taking measurements in the field, that it might be originating as a best practice around perhaps the campaign design or deployments. But then again, you know, there is sensor calibration, there is operation in the field, there might be specific calibrations in the field, there might be correction of variables, post mission corrections, etc., etc. So it covers quite a broad range of components, and one best practice doesn't have to include all of these. It could be about one component, or it could cover a range of components. It really depends on, you know, the focus of the you know, the focus of the best practice and the focus of the group using that best practice. But hopefully, when you have a system, you know, with the repository, and also through the work that I know that you do with OCG and tracking best practices from the various global observing networks for each of these areas, right the way through to you know, the data management and the metadata that wants to flow with the data. That also can be a best practice in senses that the work through OCG will help consolidate that and help fill in the gaps and allow us to see across the EOVs, but also, again, being able to go into the repository and do searches around an EOV or a sensor or a platform. You will be able to find best practices that might relate to different parts of the process. So I would just sort of add that component in as well. And so I have another couple of questions. I've got one from Nathan Anderson, and it's quite a long question, so I'll try and read this out and paraphrase it slightly. That he's a part of Ocean Sites with fully documented NetCDF files with human readable metadata. And these are stored and archived. We also work with other organizations, JCOM Ops, a part of GOOS OCG, to religiously document our data. So how can we integrate with ocean best practices without having additional commitments to each individual group? Could we absorb the standards common to other large groups rather than having PIs submit best practices documents individually? And I think, I mean, that's a big yes, but do you want to sort of expand upon that, Juliet?
Yeah, no, I think it would definitely be a big yes, but I would move that. I would ask Pierluigi to just explain, because I think the information can be taken directly from the NetCDFs if the best practices are listed in there. But I don't think you specifically list the best practice within the NetCDF.
Right.
That's
so I mean, this
for
is what.
data.
Right, but it can be linked out to data too, because again, every best practice in the repository has a unique identifier that is maintained and persistent. That is also an access point for metadata in the near future when we start to enhance that side of it. So in a NetCDF, if you want to then identify the methodology that was used to create it, especially if it's standard methodology, you can simply add that unique identity. So it's a compact format, machine readable. Machines can then hop over to the OBPR and retrieve some metadata about that best practice and link people to it. And that's part of one of our principles here. It's very future facing, in the sense that all of the tags we're using, we're trying to reuse systems that are used to mark up not just information like best practices with text mining, but also data sets and other resources that are out there. So it's kind of one thing links to another, and we just try to reuse stable solutions that have been shown to persist and actually work well.
Okay, and I think, Pierre, that you also were thinking that there might be something more to be said on the topic of creating the links between best practices for collaboration and perhaps out to data in the future. Would you like to add in to that now?
Right, it's quite a continuation of the previous question, because indeed, what happens when we tag these best practices with these sort of semantic standards or unique identifiers to concepts, etc., that makes the corpus of best practices itself an object which people can study. So you can see who's talking about the same things, who's working in the same environments with the same sensors, focusing on the same chemicals. And in a sense, we hope then to engineer the system to be able to suggest to submitters, as the collection grows to hundreds and hundreds of best practices, say, you should be talking to these people over here because it seems that you have an overlap with the kind of domain of exploration. And hopefully we can build new communities and then help develop the next set of best practices. So the platform itself is not just a repository. We aim, by using these technologies and thinking a few steps ahead, we aim to make it actually a system that helps suggest the next practices.
Okay, so I mean, and I think that's a very important point in using taking the approach we have, a very solid and reliable repository with IODE combined with this with a new technology interface is to and what we've described very much in the sort of the beta phase is producing a solid and hopefully community usable piece. But then as more people use it and more best practices are deposited, then the technology can help to make these connections and take things to a new level that hasn't been possible before, with perhaps a more static repository in some way. It's sort of verging on sort of like an artificial intelligence, I guess. And I also have a kind of a note to say that the repositories, the best practices, they will be able to link to any of the Ocean Teacher courses that are available. Okay, so we're kind of getting towards the end of the question session. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add, Juliet, in terms of sort of what we'd like to get in terms of involvement with the community, or you know, how if people want to get involved in the beta testing, how they would go about it, etc., etc. Because certainly it's important to it's important at this phase that you know, as we move through developing the first more hopefully more advanced interface, that we have some real users to come along and test that, and to make sure that we're reflecting, you know, how people are going to actually use the interface in the field, so to speak, and in practice.
Yeah, so thank you, Emma, and just thanks again to everyone for listening and for the questions. And really, please just contact any one of the working group if you're keen to be more involved. We're kind of a self-formed working group, so anyone that wants to be more involved is most welcome. And just to please look at the repository and upload best practices, download best practices. If you know of a good summer school or a good training course, drop us an email, and just, yeah, please do feedback to us.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I have to say thank you very much, Juliet, for taking us through the ocean best practice system and its various components, and I think we also got a feel for, you know, where the technology could take us in the future in some ways, and you know, how that's going to integrate and add value to the system. I'll repeat again that we have this seminar recorded, so if you want to share it or look at the seminar in a couple of weeks' time, go back to something, or find the email address for the newsletter, it will be there. You'll be notified of that. And I just want to say thank you very much to Juliet, and obviously to all of the audience for coming and joining for this GOOS webinar. Please do get involved with submitting, downloading, or providing feedback on the best practice system as it develops. We're really excited to have 300 best practices deposited now, and are really hoping to grow that into a really useful system in the community as we move forward. So thank you very much, audience, and the people who've been submitting the best practices, and also a thanks to the other members of the team who joined to fill in their expertise in the various parts of the system. So with that, I'm going to close the webinar and just say thanks once more for joining, and thanks to Juliet for giving such a great presentation and overview. Okay, so thank you, and until the next webinar. Bye.